It says rotate the phone. Why? I don't want to rotate the phone.
This is what Linda and I deal with every time.
Really?
I think we're good.
Just fine on rotation.
I think we're live.
Okay.
All right, we're going with it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So welcome.
Thank you.
So we're gonna learn about Vedic astrology. So before we jump into like what all the planets mean, what all the signs and houses, we have to start with like the building blocks of, you know, what is it? And this astrology chart is showing us a picture of the sky, the solar system, but it's not just like a personality chart. This is a karma chart, right? So when we were born, this universe was imprinted on our psyche, right? Because when we're first born, we're all receptive, right? We just sponge and absorb. And so that first moment is like our most absorbent time of our lives, that first breath in, right? So that was just imprinted on us. So this is our picture of our karma, it's our DNA. And so what it can tell us is different parts of us. You know, we aren't just one thing. We're not just our sun sign. We are all, we divide it into 7, right? 7 chakras. 7 planets appear in the sky. And so each one of those planets represents a different part of us. And each one of those planets is in a different constellation, appears in a different constellation in the sky, which shows us whether it's operating with ease and flow, which means we have, you know, relative ease with that planet. It's like good karma, right? And then there's other ones that are in difficult placements, like it doesn't operate quite right, and it's represents like difficult karma that we've got. So when that lesson arrives, it's going to be like clunky, right? You know, it's like, oh, you know, some people just have a hard time with relationships or career. You know, it just doesn't go smoothly. And that usually shows up at one of the planets is just in a sign that it's just not real comfortable in, or joined a bunch of planets that it doesn't work well with, right? So that's basically just the quick, dirty overview of what it is, right? That's what we're looking at with this. But before we get into all that, we want to see, well, what are the principles behind this thing in my hands? How did it come to be in my hand, right? And there's different Indian philosophies of why, right? And I've kind of taken my engineering brain and explained it in a way that makes sense to me, and I'll share with you guys, and might bring a different perspective than the texts that you're used to reading, and just to kind of hit it from a different angle, right? You know, when you're chopping down the tree, you gotta hit it from the left and right. So basically, how did this thing become a thing? Is it really a thing, right? And it feels pretty real, and that's what we're learning today about all the rules that we've got to follow before the physical manifestation happens.
So if we have a question, how do you want us to handle that?
Just raise your hand like a good little student, and then I'll say, yes, Michael. Do you have a question?
I already have a question.
Okay.
Based upon when you were saying that birth is like a karma chart. So I want to know, in my readings, how Indian families that are very much wanting to follow this often are focused on conception and the appropriate time. So how does conception factor into this if birth is seen as the karma chart? So
I think what they're trying to do is get the karma of that conception is like a positive environment to bring a child into the world, right? So they want to look at the time that conception is most most favorable, right? So if you have a baby and the planets are all in difficult placements, that pregnancy might go a little bit more difficult than if you chosen the right time to have a baby and it's all, good energy and all that, right? Probably a little bit lines up with like, we know it's gonna be about this many weeks, and then we'll kind of look down the road and see, oh, that's not a good time for a baby to come into the world, right?
Mm.
So probably a little of both.
Okay, and would that also take into consideration their own charts?
I would think so, yeah,
Okay.
whether or not
They should be doing
their
attempting-
karma is like, now would be there's a lot of inertia to conceiving a child right now, right? Things are, you look at the different planets for each parent, right? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So, I'm saying here in the introduction, or before we introduce the basic components of astrology, which are planets, signs, and houses, we need to anchor ourselves in the primary qualities of nature and their expression in everyday life. So, this is what we're going to do when we introduce the planets, ground it in these things. When we introduce the signs, we're grounded in these, because then we're kind of extending beyond the fluctuation to the universal, right? Truth. Grounding in truth. So, learning the mechanics of everything can be a little overwhelming, but the Vedic teachings have an elegance and simplicity that allows us to understand the eternal flow of energy and how it becomes thoughts, actions, and results. I've adapted these ancient teachings to create the following principles that demonstrate how invisible energy gets structured into physical form. So that's really, if we're following karma, right? Our karma is the conditioning, right? We've been born into a family with different rules and values. We'll have different tendencies, right? Based on our genetics, on our nature and nurture, right? All that thing goes into play, and that's the karma, right? That's our karma. So the karma is the pattern, like everything in the past is culminated in right now. That's karma. And then that creates certain conditioning in ourselves, right? The conditioning activates, right? The vritti comes, and then we have a certain way we usually do things. And this is what the chart's kind of showing us, that when this situation arrives, your tendency is going to be to do it the dark way rather than the light way, right? Or it'll be like, this one flows real nice for you, like when it's time to negotiate and do all that thing, the Venus stuff. Some people just do that real easily, and that'll show up in your chart. So we'll start with the first thing. Principle of 1. The root of all Vedic teachings is Sanatana Dharma.
Yes, baby.
So that's a Sanskrit word that means the eternal truth. And this is a truth that in the right at the turn of 1900s, we learned with quantum theory that all the atoms that we thought were the smallest things in the universe, they don't really exist, right? Everything's energy, and that's all there is, right? So physical form isn't really physical form, it's just energy in a different state of vibration. So Indian philosophy tells us that we don't have a soul, we are a soul. And physical form is an illusion of the mind. So however, since we're experiencing life through the mind in a physical body, pretty helpful to know why. Right? It's just like, I'm done, not that easy. So we'll just learn the rules so we can navigate them. So, right, my note here is everything is energy, but it's not really helpful to believe that we're a spirit, we're a soul. We need to experience that and know it. Right? That's the tricky part. That's what yoga is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't just believe it, we know it.
Yes.
And that was the one thing I wrote, is that yoga is, you're so connected in your body that there's no choice but to say, I'm not this thing, right? Okay, so principle of 2. So the act of creation begins with the union of opposite polarities, right? We're all born because a man and a woman came together. Everything is here because a thought and an action came together, right? So that feminine energy of the go in and get an idea, right, is a receptive quality of our mind. And then the action happened and then something is created, right? So that's the principle of 2. It's introduced in the philosophy of Vedanta, which reflects the ideas that emerge from the study of the Upanishads. Birth is the result of a union between masculine and feminine energies. Physical existence occurs because of the appearance of an inside and outside, a me and other than me, which is a polarity within the mind that we commonly refer to as duality.
That was
So-
my question. What was the difference between polarity and duality?
So it means there's 2 energies that are, the more that we pull them apart, the stronger that charge gets
With polarity.
with polarity.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's, once we take the thing out of equilibrium and there's a attachment and aversion, right? That charge between the 2 gets stronger. That's why the more we resist it, the more it persists, right? Because we're trying to pull away everything that feels bad and then grab on everything that feels good. So we're just like, that's what makes us emotional, right? Because we're not in harmony, right? So masculine energy, divine masculine energy, is everything that just pours out. The outward projection of energy, it moves from the surface outwards, and its archetype is the sun. The sun has 0 receptive qualities, it's all out. So the sun emits light and heat, has no receptive quality, and it represents our left brain. It's that logic, reason. And I've got a little diagram that I made for you guys.
Ooh. Sun.
It's behind,
It's 3 pages.
yeah, 3 pages in.
You're gonna
You're
drop.
on the right, you're at, yeah, go 3 pages back.
On the top.
So that's that one right there is just like the overview with the blocks there. And then this one's what I'm talking about. We got solar energy that's masculine, moves outwards. It's the yang energy. It's independent and dominant. It projects energy outward, and it's like the left brain, the math, science, the logic, the reason, the objective knowledge. Right? Just like the sun, when it comes up and it's no longer dark and we can see, you know, that objective awareness comes into the picture. So the feminine energy is lunar, and it's everything that's moving inward, right? It's our right brain. It's the art, the music, intuition, emotion, the subjective. And it's dependent, not independent. And it's submissive. So everything we absorb. So if you ever watch newborn baby, you ever hold a newborn baby, you see they're at the same time totally absorbent of what's happening, and they're also radiant, you know, because there's no fighting, you know, there's no me other than me, it's just existence, right?
They haven't been influenced by society yet.
No me other than me.
That's right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what happens is when we're a baby and we're kind of chewing on blankets, then we chomp down on our finger. Oh, what is that? Why did it hurt when I did that and not that? There's a me and an other than me, right? So that, and then when you're a little baby that has depends on everything else to take care of it, that creates a third thing, right? So when I figured out that it hurts when I bite this thing, but not when I bite that thing. That means I'm something, and that's everything else. So it's like me, this tiny helpless creature, and the rest of infinity, right? So the first thing that springs up is safety, right? So the principle of three, the separate self operates within three primal states of awareness. This principle is introduced in the Bhagavad Gita, an excerpt of the Mahabharata. A consequence of duality, described in the principle of two, is a feeling of separation that becomes the separate self as we identify with the object of perception. So from brain science, like, there's three different parts of our brain that are in operation. The reptile, the mammal, and the human brain. Right, so the lowest, most unconscious state is called tamas, which is motivated to avoid difficulty, defend and protect, which we would call the instinctive brain, and comes from the amygdala and cerebellum. So it's the reptile brain. And that regulates all of our automatic functioning. So we don't have to tell our heart to beat. We just pop food in our mouth and it does its thing. That's tamas, right? That's the positive part of tamasic energy. And then also, there are times when we've got to protect, defend, survive. And then that's when that kicks in. And if we can't access that, we're kind of helpless.
So this is sort of fight or flight.
Yeah, fight or flight happens with the reptile brain. Yeah.
Casey, these three primal states of awareness, would this be sympathetic, parasympathetic, and autonomic nervous system? Would those match up in any way, or no?
Could be, but I don't know
Okay.
the answer to that.
Okay.
So the intermediate, most conditional state is called rajas, which is motivated to fulfill desires and experience pleasure, which we would call the feeling brain. It comes from the limbic system. So once we're safe, we want to, and we're an individual that's against the whole wide world, we want to connect to other individuals, and that's what rajas does, is it makes the individual and another individual, we gotta find common ground, right, so that we can survive together. So it's that pack animal, and it's, like I said, motivated by achieve a desire or goal, those kind of things. So the highest and most evolved state is called sattva, which is motivated to harmonize, to give assistance, to balance energy, which we would call the intuitive brain, and comes from the neocortex. So we could call that Holy Trinity. The tamas would be Shiva, because he comes to destroy our attachment. And then the rajas would be Brahma, because he creates things. And then Vishnu would be sattva, right, because he balances, kind of the preserver. So there are no good or bad states of awareness, only appropriate ones for specific circumstances. We need tamas to regulate the body's automatic functioning. We need rajas to animate the physical body and complete our karmas. And then we also need sattva to transcend the experience, right? To really experience Sanatana Dharma. So what motivates us to do anything? One of those two is the motivation for everything in existence, right? Protection, survive, that kind of primal. And then we've got that fun, pleasure, have a good time. We got that rajasic. And then we've got that kind of transcend. We got to try and balance everything. And right, we're trying to resolve that polarity. And sattva kind of balances everything out so that we can experience the truth.
So if you take your statement, there are no good or bad states of awareness, only appropriate ones for specific circumstances. I find that quite interesting in the sense that what's determining appropriate? Like if we take your three qualities here.
So if the building catches on fire right now, which one do we need?
Thomas.
We need tamas, right?
Mhm.
And so then,
But we also need Thomas to digest our food as well.
exactly,
Mhm.
right, yeah. And manifest. For anything to actually take physical form, we need tamas. Or else we're just gonna have this idea, right, in sattva, we're gonna be like, ooh, this is inspiring, I can do that, but we never actually do anything. Or we'll be in rajasic, where we're just like, it's good, and it's always there, it's always an idea, but never actually put into action, never practiced. Right? And then sattva, we need that. We try to develop that in yoga and the spiritual practices just because it's so easy to get bogged down in all the humdrum of life, and we're trying to transcend it.
Well, and the appropriate response will be dictated by where someone is along the continuum of what's
Right.
most dominant.
Well, like, in the Bhagavad Gita, he says you need to drop your attachment to the family, right? So he had to do some bad things, right? He had to kill on the battlefield, and he had to summon Thomas to do that, right? That was the appropriate situation. So I've got to go to war, and I've got to be able to navigate those different states of awareness as the situation demands, right? Because a lot of people will be, I'm too spiritual, I can't do that, right? Well, yeah. You're being called on to do that by a higher purpose, right? A higher being, right? Saying, this is what you need to do right now. Can you, right? Can you drop your attachment to being spiritual and be what you need to be in that moment?
Oh, that's very interesting. Dropping your attachment to being spiritual.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting.
Because I mean, that's
Some
the last
spiritual
thing.
bypassing kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, like we use our spirituality to be like, oh,
Right.
I don't sully myself with those things.
Right.
Or to use it as a vehicle to get around.
Right, and I say it like a hot potato, where I don't let it ever touch me,
Right.
because if it wasn't required, you wouldn't be here still. You'd have transcended.
Exactly.
Right.
So you've got karma, right? So you gotta let it touch you.
Well, that goes back to your first question of saying that this is the map of why we chose to come into this physical form and not stay in the energetic form.
Right. Yeah. I say we come here to test what we think we've learned.
Come here to test what we think we have learned.
Because we have a lot of that, I got it,
Yeah.
I know better. But like, okay, prove it.
Let's see where that
Let's see
lands.
if you walk it, yeah.
So when you say we come here, so there's a choice for the spirit or the soul then, or is it being propelled by
Karma.
the divine or
Exactly.
by karma?
It's all stored and tracked by the planets, right? So our purpose here is to be fully integrated in whatever our karma is, and be able to, the situation comes, I know what that is, and I know what I'm supposed to do with it, right? Rather than just fall into, oh, this is what I do, so I do that, right? It's like, no, I know now that that's something I've done in the past, I've been conditioned to do, but here it is again. I said I learned it, and now I'm gonna prove that I've actually learned it, right?
So is there then a temporal dimension from this, say in other words, you're manifested in a physical form to address this which you think you have learned. Is there a period of time, as you've studied, that says it's every 100 years, million years, or it's just, could be whatever? To go from being that
Well, there's
energetic to coming into the physical.
there's like the yugas, right?
Yeah, they call
Where-
it the yugas.
Yeah, where what we think it is there's a dual star, right? We're a binary system. And when we're closer to the dual star, it's like the spirit understanding of spirit is more accessible to us.
Mhm.
And then in the Kali Yuga,
Oh.
we're less able to comprehend, you know, we're more physical and material. And so we have to overcome a lot of inertia to experience it, right? So the answer to that is it gets easier, but we've always got that inertia is the word for it, that we've got to overcome with our will, right? So I did a little diagram for the three. Each of these ones have a diagram. So I did this little quote from Maharishi. It says, knowledge is structured in consciousness, therefore knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. So each one of the ones we show up in the moment, the knowledge is different, right? You can prove that to yourself by when you're in fight or flight, what can you process, right? Is the information that you're processing the same as when you're sitting in meditation and you're feeling it? Yeah, so it's structured differently. So those three things are, these three are just ways that I'm relating to what we talked about. So the protection state relates to action and result. It's that physical realm. And it's that instinctive reptile brain, comes from the amygdala. It's about self-preservation, vital function, individuality, right? So we're fully in the me and other than me at that point. And then it's unconscious. Because like I said, we're farthest from the spiritual. So that's motivated to understand the individual's position in time and space, protective instinct, and asserting boundaries, right? We gotta do that once in a while. Everyone ever had to assert a boundary?
Every day.
So it's that distinction and aversion, seeking control, safety, independence, right? And so that physical realm is the astrology houses, which describe the tangible experiences. So then the attraction state is the mind and heart, right? Thoughts, emotions, the feeling brain. So this is about our emotions, our memories, our habitual behaviors, and subconscious action. It's motivated to understand the individual's relation to other individuals. It's about social etiquette, emotional control. It's got a positive charge. And it's about desire and attraction, right? We've got the aversion covered in Tamas, we've got attraction covered in Rajas. And it's seeking love, creative expression, acceptance. Anyone ever wanted any of that?
On occasion.
Okay, so now let's go up to superconscious. And that's, anyways, sorry, let me go back. The mind, the mental and emotional environments that we look at in astrology is the houses, or the signs, sorry. They are environments that are created by the planets, and they describe the internal quality of an experience. So superconscious is the
That would be
intuitive brain.
Tamas and Rajas.
Tamas and Rajas, those two.
Okay, so the first one, the protection state is Tamas.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those
then-
are houses because it's describing what's actually coming into existence.
Well, and what's
Yeah.
interesting about that from an Ayurvedic perspective, it's Tamas is associated with Kapha, which is the structure and the
Right.
strength, you know,
Exactly.
the foundation of
It's
stuff.
coming into existence, right? There's
Totally,
structure to it.
totally.
And then the attraction state is like the Rajas is the wanting something, right?
Yep. Yep. Hit the fire.
And then, the superconscious is the intuitive brain, comes from neocortex. It's about sensory perception, it's abstract thinking, and it's conscious awareness. It's motivated to understand how the world works and see the bigger picture. It's our moral compass, it's our reasoning skills, It's got no charge, right? It's about harmony and balance, just like space, right? There's no charge in space.
The final frontier.
Yeah, right? It's seeking truth, it's seeking higher purpose, and it's seeking unity. So the planets are the source energy, right? That's why next week will be about planets. That's next, after we learn all the laws. They describe what an experience is trying to teach us, right? We'll think about what is that thing, that'll be everybody's homework. What is that thing that keeps nagging at you? What is the one lesson that you can't get it? And we'll hit it through the planets. We'll figure out. That's the guy.
That thing.
That's the one.
That thing that you do.
That thing that you do, that you wish, I didn't do this. Okay.
Let's just follow up on that statement you just made, because that's a very interesting one, that I wish, the thing that I do that I wish I didn't. But isn't that a way, again, of looking at it from these perspectives? Because if L is one, and one is operating at that super conscious state, then there wouldn't be no real, concern. It would be, that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Go ahead and get there. I'll wait. Yeah, exactly. But while we're having problems, we want to understand what the problem is, right?
But then aren't we back to the good and the bad as opposed to it just is?
Well, it's like, what is this trying to teach me?
Yeah.
That's what we really want. Is like, this keeps happening. What's happening? What is it? And this gives us a tool. Be like, that's the guy teaching the lesson. And what is he supposed to do, right? What is he supposed to do generally for everybody? What is he supposed to do for you in your specific chart? And just describing that can sometimes be like, there it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There it is.
And actually, here it is right here, right on the cover of your Bible.
Yeah, right. And then, yeah.
There's your map.
Okay, principle of 5. Everybody ready? Okay, so the physical body is experienced through the 5 senses. This principle is introduced in the philosophy of Samkhya, which reflects ideas that emerge from the study of the Upanishads. The periodic table of elements in science is an expanded version of the ancient elements that are the building blocks of physical existence.
Wow.
Every thought, action, result that we perceive through the 5 senses relates to one of the 5 elements and its expression through the consciousness. So we'll start with Earth, because that's structure, right? Earth is related to our physical body and its demands. It represents our practical and detail-oriented approach to life based on previous experience and tangible results. It's down to earth, relates to the sense of smell. So like construction, accounting, physical labor, every time we want to have a plan and see it happen through the sequence of time, that's Earth. You're looking at a dude with 7 planets in Earth science.
Teaching a class.
Teaching a class,
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah.
Go back to your dating profile now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm an Earth man.
Yeah. Earthy
That could be an
dude,
entire
yeah.
app.
Yeah.
The Vedic dating.
There you
Oh,
go.
nice.
Hello.
Ooh.
Casey,
There you go. After this app
Ooh.
is done with Sam, that's the
right.
next one.
That's right.
Yeah.
Vedic dating.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
can do that.
Send me your chart.
Let's do it, babe. I know exactly. Let me look at your chart first before we have this conversation. Yeah.
So that Earth is about kind of the organization,
We're so off.
structure, physical, right? Physical body, its demands. The thing we can't ignore, right? Try being spiritual when you gotta poop. Right? That'll take the spirituality right out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so water is the element that relates to our emotions and the connections between the body and the environment. It represents our sensitive and attuned approach to life based on perceptions and intangible feelings. It's to intuitive, and it relates to the sense of taste. Example would be teaching, counseling, ministry. So the water signs are that kind of flowy, right? Like that, building a connection, right? We need that water. So it's also, you know, once we have a physical body and its structure, that we need the fluids to kind of maintain everything, right?
70% water.
That's right. So fire is the element that relates to our impressions and the active thinking mind. Represents our passionate and independent approach to life based on instinct, impulse, conditioned behaviors. It's inspired, relates to the sense of sight. Politics, law, and leadership roles. It's really take charge, right? Just like I said, when the sun comes out, what do? We get up and we do stuff. Right?
We do things.
Once we can see, right, the sense of sight, we can act. So air is the element that relates to our social skills. The intellectual thinking mind represents our thoughtful and interactive approach to life based on morals, philosophies, and agreements. It's social and it relates to the sense of touch. So communication, sales, finance, those are air sign things. It's the exchange, right? The movement and exchange, ideas, everything that moves has air. So ether or space is the element that relates to our conscious awareness. It represents the field that the four gross elements appear in or on. It's silent, it's empty, it's stillness, relates to the sense of sound. So everything that the other four elements are structured in the field of space. So that's why mantra is so powerful, is because it animates in all the other four elements, right?
So is that why, Casey, when it's said that, like when monks in Tibet are chanting and that vibration comes out there, that it raises the consciousness of the planet?
Right, because we're using light and sound, right? We're using vibration to kind of overrule everything else that's structured in something that's tangible.
That raises an interesting question because there's such a range of different sounds. So as I always say, the anti-mufflers that are out on vehicles and that are making the most obnoxious sound that nobody wants except seemingly the person driving it wants to have. But even then, you pull into your car or your garage or something and everybody's like, turn it off.
Right.
Go away.
Because we have a natural vibration that we exist at, right? And when there's something that pulls us out of that, our attachments and aversions start to pop up, right?
So each of these then really does have a range, and you can look at it, just as you were talking about earlier, about it being, I don't want to use good or bad again, but in a sense, it's either appropriate or not appropriate.
100%.
Nourishing or not
it's
nourishing.
Like air sign, what it can do is just, we're spinning in circles, right? That's what the air signs can do to us, right? Well, the water signs, we're just gushing emotional, right? The fire signs, we're just totally burning up, like just totally independent, right? I don't care about anybody else because they're not me, right? Right? And the earth sign is just like stuck, right? I can't operate outside my normal processes. I cannot compute. What do you mean, go somewhere different? I was like, I couldn't stop for gas today, honey, because that's not what I do today.
Children.
Yeah, exactly. So I did this little guy here for the 5 elements. So the air element corresponds to movement, the body, the breath, the thoughts, etc. So if you see the moon in an air sign, you're going to go meditate with your breath, right? Almost, that's what you do with those guys most of all.
Why?
Because of the air, right?
Okay.
That's how their emotions are connected to that element, right? So you'd be like,
Lots of crying.
if I regulate my breathing, I also regulate my emotions, right? So it's intellectual and social response based on morals. It's touch. It's thoughtful and interactive business, sales, finance, and communication, right? That exchange between individuals is the air element. So the fire element is passionate, reactive response based on instincts, impulse, condition, behavior, sight. It's bold and independent, right? It corresponds to our digestion of food, ideas, impressions, etc., right? Pitta, digests, right? A lot of people swallow, never digest, right? That's when we've got some fire issues, right? That we're taking all sorts of actions, but it's getting us nowhere, right? So that executive, politics, law, competition, right? The sight, right? If they've got a moon in a fire sign, to regulate your emotions, you need to visualize something, right? That visualization.
Donald Trump. Here.
We'll do that at the end.
Sounds good. We'll hold on
That
to
was my one case study that I did for this course.
Oh,
right.
great.
Ooh.
That's
Ooh.
great.
I'm excited.
So the water element is emotional, sensory response based on perceptions, intangible feelings. It's related to taste, sensitivity, examples, teaching, counseling, ministry, guidance, right? When we have that kind of, I don't know why I know what I know, right? That corresponds to our sensitivity to connections made between the physical body and the environment, right? So, can't put your finger on it, just like water. Try to grab it, doesn't work. So earth is the practical, hands-on response based on tangible results, previous experiences. People with earth, this guy, like to see something happen at the end of the day. They want to see progress made. I want to start the day here and then see that at the end of the day I did something. So it's disciplined, organized. Examples: construction, accounting, strategy, labor. So it corresponds to our physiology, physical demands of our body, and satisfying all of its needs.
So if the moon's in the earth sign and the water sign, what's the?
They'll be grumpy if we're just spinning our wheels, we're not going anywhere.
So
It's
like
give them
ground,
something.
if the moon's in an earth sign, are you just grounding yourself?
Grounding,
Is
right,
that
grounding,
the-
give something, make a list. That's the best thing to do for somebody in the earth, moon in the earth sign. That's what I do when I'm frazzled. Sit down, list.
Yeah.
What is it? And then start checking off things on the list. Ooh, that's the best feeling in the whole wide world for me. The little bubbles on Facebook, I can't, if I'm not in a place where I can deal with it, I just have to turn the friggin' thing off, because I'll pop up my buddy's phone and it'll be like, what is all this, man? Like bubbles everywhere. How do you live? Like, this is no way for a person to live. I can't deal.
You mean like all the apps that are?
Yeah, when you have an app and like something, like someone likes your post on
Like a
Facebook,
notification.
a little red one will appear on the Facebook app. I was like,
You
if that's
have
there,
you have nothing in your inbox, do you?
nothing. Yeah. And you should see, like, I've got them all in like folders, all of my apps, like they're
That's what my
categorized.
son did. He's so
Mine
like
does that.
everything's all in
Same
one
way.
page.
Yeah.
He can't stand it when he sees
He
it.
clears it
I
out
can't-
once a day, everything is.
Right, when I watch Sam's videos, and it's like, I'll see his desktop and like, oh, I can't look at it. Put the maximize.
It's too hot.
So ether is that silent and aware, right? So if we're going to become in touch with the ether, we want to look at the objects of perception and then become aware of the space in between. And then also the sounds are happening. what is the silence that the sounds are appearing on, right? And the emotions are happening, what's the stillness that those emotions are appearing on, right? You're like kind of, because we're like fish in water, that fish doesn't know it's in water because it's in water all the time, so its brain cancels it out. So we're in space all the time, but we never think about space. So when we're in meditation, we're becoming aware of the space, right? Which, like we said, it animates all the other ones. So when you get in touch with that one, it balances out all the other ones, right?
Sitting in oblivion.
That's right. Space cadet. My son gets in trouble with that all the time, but mostly because I envy it.
Does he just space out?
Oh yeah, like once this moment's done, the last one's gone. And
I love that.
it's great for adulthood, but crap when
When
you're
you're
in
trying to
school
learn.
and you got an assignment that's due. Okay,
Did you
principle of
choose the
setting.
colors for a reason? Like I get fire would be red, blue, but is there a significance for the colors here under the elements?
I liked it.
Okay, that's perfect.
Also, I
Okay,
just
got
kind of
it.
was looking at on Google Images, I was looking at the
Okay.
different ones, and you see ones where it's like, that doesn't look right. And then I'd look at ones and like, that looks right. So that's kind of,
Got it, alright.
it felt right.
Yeah, it would be weird to see the fire as green, so you
Yeah.
did good.
Yeah, right. Air was like, what color is air, right? I mean, earth, green, you think of green, water, blue, fire, red. Like, what do we do air? And I was like, primary colors, right? So I used yellow.
It's awesome. And you made all of these yourself, right?
I did, I used AutoCAD.
It's the engineer. Yeah. So beautifully done.
So, once we had that motivation from one of the 3 primary states of awareness, the principle of 5 gives us, once we have that motivation, how do we make it happen, right? The fire signs charge forward, don't do a whole lot of planning. The water signs feel into it, how do I do it? Let's feel it. And then the air signs, let's talk, let's share, let's communicate, right? Interact. And then earth signs make a list, right? Like plan, organize,
What did you say water was?
feel into it. Just like, what is it? I gotta feel my way into this thing.
Okay. And then fire was make it happen?
Just do it.
Just do it
Just
without
do
coming.
it.
Just do it.
Okay,
What are you
and then-
worried about?
And then space and ether was?
That one's not one of the gross, that's
Okay.
not one of the ones that we do anything with, it's
Okay.
what it appears on, right?
Yeah.
Everything's happening on the screen of consciousness. In the space.
So characterize this in terms of, again, the doshas.
So fire would be pitta, right?
Right.
Air would be vata, and then water would be kapha,
Okay.
and then earth
Kapha.
is kapha also.
It's combos.
It's a they're combination
Yeah.
in that regard. So your yogic practice is really to help you become more, this is what I find interesting right now, because you can do the Vedic astrology thing, and you can look at when you were born, and they will tell you all of these things. But the
Right.
yogic practice, we would say, is an experiential practice to come to terms with who you really are. And so is that, in a sense, getting at this just from another direction?
Exactly.
Okay.
Here's what I am, right here.
To realize what is already here based upon this
Right
other,
here.
Yeah.
more conceptual, elaborate,
There it is.
energetic.
I've tried a million ways to pretend I'm not that thing, but here it is.
But I'm not that
All the masks I've worn. Underneath it, there it is again. Okay, principle
Casey,
of
do you
seven.
want a chair? Do you want to sit, or you're good standing?
I'm good as long as
Okay,
you
yeah,
guys
no,
are.
no, it's fine, I just didn't want you to think you had to stand the whole time.
So the human being is a miniature version of the solar system. This principle is introduced in the Vedas themselves, the most ancient Indian texts that are the origin of all the Vedic sciences. The atom, the solar system, the Milky Way galaxy are all alike in principle, but different in scale. The ancient saying goes, as above, so below, as within, so without. Tells us that while we're a part of an infinite universe, the infinite universe is part of us in return. Each planet in the solar system is a physical manifestation of invisible energy. That's what everything is. These energies can be located within our body's 7 chakras. Sanskrit word for planet is graha, which is the word that relates to grab, because they grab us to our karma and deliver the fruits of our past actions. So when a dasha period, like a timing cycle, activates through the chakra, and then that energy channel goes through, and we're wired to deal with that energy at a certain vibration, and poof, all of our conditioning comes up, and it's like there's the test activated through the chakra, which is linked to the planet. Right? That's quantum entanglement, right? Because you can manipulate something that's alike in principle, and no matter how far away it is, if it's related, it'll respond. That's what quantum entanglement is. So you have to help me with the pronunciation. Muladhara chakra.
Yeah.
It's the root chakra. It's related to the element of Earth and the planet Saturn. And it's about physical manifestation, our body's needs. That reptile is Saturn, saying the time is coming for you. We love you, big guy.
So is there a Saturn return in Vedic astrology, like the
Yeah,
Western?
every 30 years
Yes.
it comes back to the place it was in your birth, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So each planet has a return, right? It comes back. And so the sun, obviously 1 year, right? The moon is 30 days, and Venus and Mercury are connected to the moon because we're outside of their orbit, so they're a year, give or take. Mars is 2 years, and Jupiter's 12 years, and then Saturn's 30 years.
Can you say those again? I'm sorry. So Saturn is how long?
It's
30 years?
like 29 years, every 29 years.
Okay, and then Jupiter?
12.
Okay.
So somewhere around the 60th birthday,
Uh-huh.
you'll see the both return, the Jupiter and Saturn, and that's always a big time
Got it.
because it's like the 2 big boys are finally both coming home at the same time.
Yep.
And you're like,
oh boy.
urgency, right? There's like that Jupiter coming home saying, did you get it yet, right? Did you get that big thing? And then Saturn saying, how many more do you got left in you, right? That second time around where it's like,
Okay,
we got
gonna
maybe
go?
one left, you know?
I didn't think of it that way. I had 60
But it's like
this year,
time
so,
to get
but I
serious.
didn't think of
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, yeah.
the remainder part.
right. It's like,
Well, I mean, if you think about retirement,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
oscillating around that time, you're just like, okay, you know, like, let's do
People
this thing.
reinventing themselves.
well,
Yeah.
you think about Saturn, like when we hit 30 is when the time we're like, I've got to get my life together,
Yeah.
right? It's time to get serious. And then 60 is usually when we're like, what am I, you know, my body can't hold up forever. I've got to be able to set myself up to relax, retire, and all those kind of things, right?
How many years is Mars?
It's 2 years.
Yeah, I thought so. And Venus?
The Venus and Mercury are both kind of 1 year-ish because they're inside the orbit of the Earth.
Yeah. Yep. The Venus and the Mercury.
So that root chakra, the primal stuff, is Saturn. And then okay, let's see if I can do it. Svadhisthana
You got it.
chakra. It's the sacral chakra, element of water, and that's the planet Jupiter. And that's our emotional response. And then the Manipura chakra, the solar plexus, element of fire. That's Mars, and that's our instinctive action, get out there and do it. The Anahata chakra, the heart chakra, is the element of air. It's related to the planet Venus, and that's like our social consideration, just manners, all those things where we've got to worry about someone other than ourselves, right? So we've got to navigate that negotiation between two people. The Vishuddha chakra, the throat chakra, is the element of ether, sound, and that's Mercury, and it's about objective observation, input, output. The Ajna chakra, third eye, is about light, insight. It's the luminaries, both sun and moon are there. It's truthful self-awareness. The Sahasrara chakra, the crown, is just energy, pure energy, thought, soul, Atman, is about our infinite potential. So we'll expand upon the planets and their expression in the next class, the overview of the building blocks, that gives support and structure, because I'm an earthy guy, to each class teaching that precedes it, right? And we're going to anchor ourselves, because this is what I'm here to do, is to help everybody anchor in, rather than just memorizing all the little things and watching a whole bunch of videos and be like, this is that, that's that, that's that. It's all little programs. We're going to anchor it. This means that, right? So I don't have to flip back into my book and be like, this means, what did that mean again? Flip back in my book. It'd be like, that's that, because I'm anchored in that truth that I don't need it anymore. So after every new lesson, we'll anchor ourselves in the soil of these foundational principles, so that we will be returning these concepts as we move forward. So my last diagram is my masterpiece.
It is gorgeous.
So this is talking about how from thought, this vibration, the energy goes down through the elements and manifests in the earth, right? That lunar flows down. It's the path of manifestation. So once we learn that path of manifestation, we just walk that bitch backwards for spirituality. Right? So the idea, the input of information is that insight, right? We get an idea that comes to us from the realm of thought, which is that vibration, right? That's what Deepak calls a thought, is an impulse of energy and information. And then once we get that input, we've got to understand what the heck it means, right? So we get this little flash of inspiration, and then it's like filter through the analytical mind, which relates to the throat chakra and Mercury. So we try to make sense of what just happened and learn how to talk about it. And then we have to make a decision, right? Because we've got a plan, we've got an idea, something we're gonna do. We've already got people in our lives, we've got to navigate and do all these things. Like, I'm here at a class, but I had to I've got wife and kids, we got to do all the, how does this affect everybody else, and make sure that we're negotiating. So we decide how it affects ourselves and other people. Then output starts to come, air becomes fire, that idea becomes an action, right? I say we visualize the end result and start taking actions, but it's like that. Once we start thinking about it and thinking about it, it's like, ooh, there's an opportunity comes along, action happens. Right? This is that masculine, feminine thing again. We have been receiving an idea from somewhere, and then actions taken, plants a seed. So then the water comes along because something's changed, right? That seed's been planted, action's been taken. We've got to feel our way into whether or not that, is this right? Does this resonate, right? We got to feel it. So we reflect on the actions and adjust our vibration, right? Because everything we do different, we have to resonate with that. And then outcomes is the manifested reality. So we we have to let go of the attachment to the outcome for it to actually happen, right? You can never want something and have it at the same time, right? Right? It's like, you're never gonna manifest it until you let go of wanting it, right? Which one comes first? Chicken or the egg? Right, so if we're walking that in reverse, right, we've got the needs of the body we gotta fix first, right? Like I said, I'm not gonna sit down and try to meditate when I've got an urgent poop, right? And then like hungry, thirsty, all those things, if I try to do that now, I've gotta just take care of all my body's needs, then I'll get ready for the spiritual process, right? And then once we sit down, all the needs are taken care of, the emotions, we gotta navigate that field, right? Where things start coming up, if you wanna heal it, you gotta feel it, right? And then up into the up into the fire element, where we have to use desire to move us towards freedom. So we're in this body with attachments and aversions. We can use that to launch us up, right? We can use that dysfunctional process to hit a higher target. So then the heart comes in, we allow the peace in our heart to guide us forward, right? Because a lot of our fire conditioning is we want to feel the imbalance, right? We're addicted to that swinging pendulum of pleasure and pain, right? But once we learn to let peace be the thing that guides us, is this the right thing? Not the thing that feels like it's pulling on me. I want it to be peace. If I feel peace, then I know that's the thing, right? Now I'm going for that. And then the higher cognitive brain, the sound, the ether element is about using the intellect to make the unconscious conscious. Right? That's what astrology is, really the helpful tool, because a lot of the things we don't know until way down the road, we can look at it like, that was coming through from somewhere, I don't know. So when we can see it, then we can do something different. So then the light, the insight, the third eye chakra is about single pointed awareness, leads us to all knowingness, right? Because we're never going to get there until we can focus on something, right? When we can single pointed awareness, then everything will make sense.
Casey, how does this relate, like, with, because when we went down, it was like, okay, the thought or an energetic comes in,
right?
if you would, and that it trickles down.
Right.
Thought versus sensation. So where does sensation come in on this?
Well, they're all different senses, right?
Okay.
The air is the sense of touch, right? We kind of grasp what's happening. And then the fire is about seeing it, right? Once we can grasp it, we can kind of picture ourselves doing something, right? And then the water is like, picture ourselves, but it has to feel right. You know, it's like, I could do that, but it feels a little weird.
So is it that thought turns into sensation through the senses?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. It's like the field, right? It's all there, it's all energy, but until it comes through the dual mind, it's not a sensation. Right? Does that make sense?
So if you were to think about this in terms of, I'm quite fascinated now. All of a sudden, I just thought, well, think of all these psychological tests that are out there. You know, I mean, I'm trying to think, what are the ones that we've done?
Like the MBTI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what is your
So like
Myers-Briggs?
what was Carl's Myers-Briggs, right?
Yeah, that's
Some of the
MBTI.
big thingies that are out there. And stuff.
ETFM or whatever.
did Myers-Briggs and these kinds of things, first of all, so, I mean, if we take this into consideration, I mean, obviously this goes back thousands of years, so if we look at this as a much more in-depth dimension than Myers-Briggs, or is Myers-Briggs in many ways kind of based upon loosely?
I've played around with that, like I took the Myers-Briggs and I was like, how does that relate, right? And I was tinkering with it a little bit, but I didn't get all the way. It was kind of like, I need to put this away for now and come back to it. But I have tinkered with that, right? Just because, right, this is universal, right? So of course it applies to that because this is what the source is, right?
So, but what I would say too is that you look at Myers-Briggs, which is associated with psychology, right? But the one thing that they do with psychology is they don't go back to the point of we are a soul.
Exactly.
They skip that component.
We stop at mind,
Yes.
right?
And so that's where it may overlap, but it's still limiting. It's still missing a point because it's not getting back to source.
Right, that's where the Western deals with the objective and the Eastern is the subjective, right? But we have to merge those two together, right? It's the Western, like psychology and all that stuff, was really microscopic on all the things that actually happen, right? All the physical manifestations.
Which doesn't necessarily make it wrong.
Not wrong, it just
No.
isn't. They don't know what's
There's-
the source of it all,
Well, there's a
right?
component missing.
Right, it's like, what's the source? Where does that come from, right?
Which is really quite fascinating.
Yeah,
actually,
right.
as you start to present. And then I start thinking about, this immediately took me then from Myers-Briggs to the movie Divergent, or the book.
Okay.
And and I don't know if you know that, but where, in a sense, if you have a malevolent entity or whatever, and they're using something like this, and they're saying, well now, because of your makeup, we're going to now channel you into this profession or lifestyle or peer group or whatever, and that you aren't allowed to then
Get out of that.
get out of it or address your karma in a sense, because society is now
Indians
channeled.
did that a lot with the castes.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Arranged marriage.
Right,
Right? No?
right.
Well, and in many ways, like as it relates to arranged marriage, a lot of it comes from, I mean, they go to Jyotishis to
Right.
see if
Compatibility.
they're compatible charts.
Right.
People do, oh yeah, I mean, like that's part of the process.
But they're also, you know, in this day and age, like, make sure she's submissive to the man, right?
Yeah, in some ways.
Right,
yes.
yeah.
Yep, very much so.
So, it's all about using that technique
Right.
in a way that is applicable to the culture, right? So, you know, when I study it, I've like gotta learn how they do it and then also understand that they're doing it for a different culture, right? So it's like, well, I have to look at the principles, right? Get back to that principle. What's the principle behind what they're doing? And then I can be like, well, how does that apply to the way a man and a woman in the United States get together? I mean, that's two different things.
Well, and what I also hear what Michael is referring to is like, can we take free will out of this equation and still learn the lessons that we need to learn?
Well, the way I explain that is like, free will is, you know, right now, sun's going down, right? There's no free will as to changing that, right? So our free will is like, what do we do now that it's going down, right? I've got a choice to do something with it, right?
We
So
turn on
that's-
the lights and
Right.
we pretend it's still up.
Exactly, right.
I mean,
I
Right.
can still see
Right.
it.
because we're not being in step with nature.
No.
Yeah, we're not in
We're-
tune with nature.
We're
so, yeah.
interfering with,
We're
yeah.
we're forcing our agenda onto the nature, right? Which is black magic, right? Right.
it is
Yeah.
really, as you say.
Right.
So and then this is gonna bring another question, because I mean, from an Indian perspective, it's always so fascinating, because there's like the two things that are so popular there. First, you have the rug salesman. But then you have
Been there.
the gemstones. And the gemstones, every time you go into a gem place, they say, oh, let me do your Vedic astrology. And I'm gonna tell you which gemstone you should have. And you need to wear it. And maybe you need more than one.
They tell you what finger to wear it on.
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious what your take is on that. You know, I mean, and I know that's probably
And
a
I
big
feel
question.
like there's something to it, but I don't feel like it's as much as they, like, cause yeah, the gemstone channels the planetary energy, right? It's, you know, from the earth, and it has a certain vibration to it, right? But without carefully saying, you know, you can say Jupiter's the good one, right? But if I give it to a Libra, Jupiter's not a functionally good planet for a Libra, because they came here to learn Libra lessons, which is about the exchange, the interaction, you know, and so the big picture conceptual stuff creates a lot of issues for Libra. And so if somebody isn't properly trained, and like, they're like, Jupiter's the good one, give them the Jupiter stone, which is the yellow one. I'm not sure which one it is. But
Yellow sapphire, maybe?
right, yeah, that's yellow sapphire, right? And so if you went there and got the yellow sapphire, this is the good one, right? And you're like, why is it all going to crap? Like, this is garbage, right? You know, so I think it's like there's a place for it, but I think without the discrimination, it's, you know, you have to find the right, just like Western medicine, right? If you don't have the right doctor doing the right thing, you're just gonna make a mess of everything, right? But if somebody understands the context of how it is and what it's supposed to do, is like, we can use Western medicine in alignment with everything else, and it helps us, right? Because we have a place for that. We know it's in context with that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, that was lesson one.
Awesome, awesome.
So good.
Sounds like you need to add another lesson on gemstones.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, no,
I would
right.
love that. It is so true though, because it is like one of the most fascinating. Did you
Yeah.
get a gemstone when
I
you were there?
did.
Did they do the Jyotish
They
thing for you?
did.
See?
I
Oh, you're
experienced
gonna
all
go
that
check
stuff.
it with Casey, make
I
sure she's
should.
You should
approval.
double
What did I get? Blue, they told me blue sapphire, diamond, and opal.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what they told me that I should wear.
Frawley has gemstone stuff,
He
and
does.
I've started looking at it a little bit, but I got sidetracked on other stuff. I was like, I gotta come back to this, because his stuff is dense, you know, to get through.
Oh, is it ever?
Yeah.
It's good, but it's
Yeah.
dense.
So when you're talking about, let's just go back to the example
Yeah.
you gave. You said
Do it.
somebody you said they were a
Libra.
Libra,
Libra.
and they
Yeah, I
were
was
told,
looking at somebody.
and it would not necessarily be a good thing for them to do
Would that be,
Jesse?
the yellow
See?
sapphire. So how do you like, I mean, I guess, I don't know.
I'm checking what I'm wearing, I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I don't
I know. So everybody else, I know you just did mine quickly, but I don't, how do I know, I'm a Capricorn because,
So you're
am I really a Capricorn?
you are a Gemini in
Rising.
Vedic, because that's where we start in Vedic, is the ascendant, right?
Okay,
And so you'd be a Gemini, which means that, like,
now when you say ascending, so maybe that's helpful to know what you mean by when you start with ascending, so
so like the place right here, right now,
okay.
if you were born here,
Mhm.
we would look at, on the eastern horizon, there's a constellation rising up into
Okay,
the sky,
rising,
so
so
where
what's
that
coming up on the
split,
eastern horizon,
what
okay.
splits the horizon on
Okay.
rising, right?
Got it.
Yeah, so when you were born, Gemini was rising,
Okay.
right? So that means you came here to have a Gemini experience, which means like, you know, Gemini's like Libra and Gemini have a lot in common, right? It's about exchanging ideas, right? It's an air sign.
I think you're crazier though. I think you're the crazier sign, I don't know, I'm Gemini.
There's two, yeah, you know, you've got the
Right.
two parts in a sense, so.
Well, now
it's
it's
like-
about balance, that's
so-
what I just see that Libra
Yeah, Libra and Gemini are not that far apart.
Yeah, they're both Rajasic air signs, right? They're both Rajasic air signs. So those principles, we'll get into that when we get to the signs, but they have that in common, right? And so, you know, one thing about Gemini is that's the plane of the galaxy, right? Runs along the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. So if you look into Sagittarius, you're looking back into the galactic core. And if you look at Gemini, you're looking straight out away from the galactic core. That makes sense. And so it's got there's the tree of life is represented by the galactic core. And so that Gemini is about there's destructive qualities to it because it's where energy becomes a little less structured and available to us. Yeah, it's less dense, right? It's about the questions that we've got. We've got to be able to explain it, right? That's Mercury, right? It's like being able to process the information, explain it, talk about it. That exchange of ideas is Gemini, right? Libra is more like the transaction of, is it fair? Am I getting this? Are you getting that? That kind of, you know, it's got to be equal, right? Leo's about trying to put me in charge of the business, right?
How appropriate!
Looks like you guys need a CEO.
That's gotta be tough for Geminis.
Well, it's interesting because, from a Western perspective, based on the month I was born and everything, that I fall into the Gemini category. But from a Jyotish perspective, I'm Leo ascending.
Right.
Which is funny because the reverse in Western, I'm a Capricorn, and so I'm the opposite in a sense. Well, I don't know what you say Capricorn is, but from Capricorn, they always say, well, Capricorn are like a lot of CEOs and a lot of bankers.
Right. It's the Tamasic Earth sign, right?
Yeah.
Capricorn is, so it's about the less the CEO and more the management, right? Like I said, it's about having that system and structure in place and making sure all the people are doing what they're supposed to.
What is the relationship? Can you explain a little bit about the difference between Eastern Jyotish and Western? Because I think a lot of folks get very, a lot of people are just like, oh, I'm a Cancer,
I gotta tell you,
your world is rocked.
I totally, I'm like, it is a full moon, but it's not the full moon as I thought it was.
It has to be fair.
I'm like, what do I do?
Man, let me tell you, this Leo moon cycle got me fired up about that too. I sent a GIF to my fellow people and I was like, this is me at all the yoga studios saying the Libra new moon, and I had a kick down door.
You lost it.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, I can't take it. Sister sciences, doesn't everybody know? So yeah,
No, they don't.
the Western,
And that's why you're here.
So the Western is really sun and sign centric, right? The sun sign, right? And what did we learn about the sun today? All out, right? No receptive qualities, right? So it's about personality, right? The way you kind of project yourself out into the world, which we're obsessed with in the world, right? Like, that's me, right? That the fire is that independent self. So that's, the sun sign is more about like that, how you project yourself out into
When
the
you were
world.
talking about the baby biting on his finger, the image that came to me was when you see a child first recognize his own reflection in a mirror. And when they don't, and they think it's another person. But that makes me think of when you're speaking about the sun, that's me coming into recognition.
Right, so there's a lot of ego wrapped up in that because this is me, right? This is me, this is how I project myself out into the world. And that's me. But the Vedic is more about, like I said, rising sign, that intersection of the earth and sky, the body and spirit, right? Earth, sky, body, spirit. And so that's where we start because that describes the whole architecture of the sky from our place on the earth. And so when we're looking out at the stars, rather than just paying attention to the earth and its relationship to the sun, we've got a bigger scope, right? We're reaching out beyond the local into the infinite, right? That's kind of what we're doing in yoga, right? And that's why it's a sister science, because we aren't just worried about me as it relates to the world and everybody in it, but where do I come from and how do I get back there, right? And that's what we're trying to do with the astrology chart, is like my infinite self, how do I integrate with that?
So it's like me as part of source.
Right.
Versus me out there in the world with no connection to the greater cosmos.
Right.
It's helpful.
And is it you as part of source, or just would it be you as?
Or source, right.
How do I integrate with infinite? Right, how do I integrate with everything that there is? Rather than just worried about that one thing that is about me shining out, right?
We are everything. Well, like you said, in the principle of seven, the human being being a miniature version of the solar system, we are our own, everything we need is right inside of us. We are the cosmos. We are the mini ecosystem.
And just like a lot of things in the West, the spirit is lost in it, right? Because we're worried about the results,
The material.
how it does something. But really, soul and solar, right? The sun, that's our soul, right? That's our soul right there, right? But we've corrupted that because we lost the context of where the soul is coming through you, and we're going, this is coming from me, right? That we're trying to let that energy pass through us, right? The source energy, solar power. Turn on the solar power.
And so
even the
you
sun sign is different. Like my Western sun sign is Taurus, but
Right.
Vedic I'm Aries.
Right, because
of when I was.
Right, because the equinox and solstice points are where we measure in Western is like that spring equinox is Aries, right? No matter when or what the stars look like. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that slowly separating
Over the years.
Like, so when Ptolemy, which is the guy everybody wrote the Tetros Biblios, which is the Western astrology Bible, right? Is from 200 AD, which is when they were both the same. So he was trying to.
What two were the same?
The sun on the day of the equinox was right on the first point of Aries. The two were the same. So he was trying to stabilize the calendar, right? And he was doing it astronomically. And so he called it that because we want the first day of spring to be Aries, right? Because that's the new life coming, right? And well, planting, right? Obviously agriculture had something to do with that. We're trying to stabilize our calendar because when we're just doing it like that, if we plant seeds every year when the sun hits this star, we won't necessarily get a successful crop, right? Because every 72 years we're moving back a degree. So eventually you're gonna be planting it in the winter, right? Which doesn't make sense. So he was trying to stabilize that. So it basically, Western sun sign is a calendar. It's not a zodiac. So sometimes it's a little bit funny, it makes sense with the earth going around the sun, but like the other things you're gonna say is, it's the same as saying like if the moon was in Virgo, we're calling it the moon's in August, right? That's basically what we're doing. The reason that you can, when the Western astrologer does all the little things, it'll resonate because geometry is involved, which when they have a different spatial relationship to each other, they operate differently. So some of those things they'll say make a lot of sense, they're insightful when someone's doing actual Western astrology, practicing it properly. But like the sun sign, like I said, kind of dumbed down to the point where it doesn't really mean anything. Some people relate to it, but it's like you're saying that everybody born from that date range has the same personality.
Not mine.
Like that's not scientific at all, right? You can get twins, right? That's why says this why the point is. It's not a personality profile, it's a karma, right? Twins come in same karma because they came from the same womb, they have the same upbringing, they've got the same karma, right? That's why twins can be two different personalities and have nearly identical charts, right?
Even if they're born hours apart.
Well, then there'll be a lot of changes, but there's some that like 6 minutes apart. I know a boy-girl twin that are that far apart, and they're like, they're not the same. Like, well, what the hell's the deal here? Well, they've got the same karma. They both come from the same egg, for crying out loud, right? So it's like,
And chose each other.
right, and so that karma is the same. They had the same parents, the same genetic code, same upbringing, and that's where it is. Like the karma is still there. It's just that free will, right? And someone did something different with that karma than the other person did.
But even in the case of twins, how that karma plays out in each of their lives can be very different.
Exactly. Well, it's like the lesson is going to come
In a different way.
A spectrum, right? Well, I'll look at the cycles of time, right? And I'll be like, the karma is there for both of them, but it comes in a spectrum of depending on their environment, right? Because there's two different things. We've got the internal thing going on, like it's time to learn this lesson, but if you're over here and you're over here, I can't give you exactly the same thing at the same time. It has to work within the environment. So they're getting the same karmic lesson, it's just that it appears differently.
So how do you characterize samskaras here? I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious about these patterns as they relate to samskaras, but then the whole personality piece again, and the karmic piece, because I want to...
Right, because the samskara is like the pattern of thought that we have, right? So it's like, you've got the planetary placement is imprinted on you, right? So your samskara will be, with your emotions will be related to your moon, and its placement will be, show you what that pattern is, right? And
okay, so your personality then is a cocktail of what?
the 7 different planets and their placements and how we experience them, right? So it's like, if we can break up our consciousness into 7 different parts, like light through a prism separates into 7 parts, right? So we can judge each thing in its categories. So that we're kind of a collection of all the planets working together, right? And if we're just trying to like, who am I? And we don't have that tool, it's like we've got to sort through all the memories and all the different things. But if we've got this tool, we would like, let's work on this thing because that's the one that's been bothering me all this time. Like it's got the difficult, some scars, right? When the partner does that, I always do this dysfunctional thing and it's over and I wish I didn't do the thing, you know, it's like, let's look at Venus. You know, we don't need to look at all that other stuff. We can look at this one because that's what that relates to.
So again, playing along with this, then you look at that and then what does that direct you to? Maybe this is a future lesson, but
yeah.
What does that direct you to examine?
Well, it's like we know what the planet wants to do, right? what it's meant to do.
Well, what is it supposed to, tell me what is Venus?
What Venus is supposed to do? We're supposed to be happy for no reason whatsoever.
Okay, so
Right.
like, and blissful.
Right, but we've got to interact with other human beings with other different needs. So always there's this negotiating between what makes me happy, but if I do all that and I don't do any of the things that make you happy, we've got issues and we've got to renegotiate, right? So the Venus thing is supposed to, at every moment of every day, be evaluating that negotiation and renegotiating when there's a change in the situation, right? What other, like if we're trying to use, it's like, oh, that energy doesn't work really well for me. I don't have an easy time compromising. I don't have an easy time telling what you need, right? If your Venus isn't operating really well, I'll just be like, I don't care what he needs because I can't channel that energy, right? So what if I see somebody that's like really uncompromising, can't tell what anyone else's needs, I'm gonna be like, something messed up with that person's Venus.
Your Venus is sideways.
Oh, that's what it was.
Right, so then
Venus is sideways.
Then I'd be like, this is what I can, as an astrologer, say, this is what it wants to do. This is what this planet wants to do, and this is, we can transcend the need to be happy for a reason, right? Because this person did that, now I'm happy. Because they didn't do that, I'm unhappy, right? But it's like, well, let's do something that doesn't require transaction. Like, I took a bite of this and it tasted great, and I was happy, and I didn't have to work with anybody to get it, right? Right? Like,
Chocolate.
the sunset was really beautiful.
Chocolate cake.
I made this art that was really great. You know, if someone's really needs help with their Venus, I'll be like, wear something nice, just look pretty, just attract some attention, do some art, all those kind of soft, fluffy things, you know, just do that without needing to do the interaction, and you're helping that energy evolve,
Cultivate.
right? You're helping it, right? Because when it's something in a difficult, if it's really difficult, it's like you're trying to, it's like, if something's like a really bad placement, it's like the arm that just got out of a cast. So then you're trying to do a push-up and it collapses, right? So like we have to do something that's real easy to kind of cultivate some strength, right? We have to build that muscle with, not with a relationship right now. Let's start with just like make some pretty paintings. Let's listen to some nice music. Let's do all the things that raise that energy. And then we can be like, that makes me feel good. Does that make you feel good? And be like, no, it doesn't make me feel good. Okay. And then after that, so find something like, okay, well, what feels good for both of us, right? Do you like that type of music, that type of music? Oh, I like that type of music too, right? So let's listen to that together, right? And then you're kind of slowly building that thing up. And that's how we can use astrology to help with those kinds of things. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yes.
Anything else?
Do we have homework assignment?
Yes.
Do we need to like read this by?
Read the whole thing.
Yeah, chapter 1 pretty much describes that process.
Perfect. Welcome to the universe.
And
Oh boy.
Sam has a lot more yoga and text background than I do, so he'll help you guys tap into that thing because I know you're into that. That's not my strong suit, but he's going to talk about the 108, right?
Yay.
Yay.
I love that.
Like literally, that makes me
Yes,
so
I
happy.
love that.
And then he's going to go into some scripture.
Sacred.
I didn't know that Sam's guru was,
I just,
Mazda Devi.
oh my god, I just thought.
I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't know that,
I didn't
Mama?
know it was Amma.
Mm-hmm.
I
I saw that
almost-
picture.
I almost saw her when I was in Kerala in February, but I didn't. Excuse me.
Yeah, so I think if you guys read that chapter 1 and get to chapter 2 where it says beyond the mat.
Do you want us to read 1 and 2 or just 1?
Yeah, we can do 1 and 2 because that's got some of the text stuff that you can,
Okay.
3 gunas, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
there
this
you go.
is so cool.
Oh my god, so good. So good.
And that'll have some of that samskara that you were asking about
Oh,
on
yeah.
page 55.
Well, and when you were talking about the twins, did anybody see the movie where they separated the triplets?
Mm-mm.
So there was a psychologist who literally separated multiple triplets and twins at birth.
Oh boy.
Okay,
It's actually quite fascinating.
just to see if they were the same.
Yeah, he had,
Wow.
meetings with them as they were growing up. The parents did not know they were twins or triplets. And how they all met each other and their identical natures, who they were, their personalities, who they liked, how they spoke, the challenges that arose. One of them was they ended up at the same school, finding each other. It's actually quite fascinating, but it goes in line to exactly what you were talking about, where they came in with the same karma and, you know, nature versus nurture. Nurture is the key component to allow those things to come out, but it did not change the nature
Right,
at all.
yeah.
It's fascinating.
It is, I'll send you the link. It was
If you have
really great.
Awesome.
And that's good,
Yeah,
you
that-
know, like when you've got kids to realize that some of it's just nothing you did. You know?
No, it is
Right.
really good. They are who they are,
Right.
and they
Right.
come in with their own stuff.
You
that
can
they're here to
refine
learn.
the qualities, but you can't completely upside down.
And that doesn't, also in this case, I mean, there was damage done by a psychologist because this was a
Yeah.
direct experiment that
Yeah.
was
Right.
morally.
That's why we don't do that, yeah.
And so there, you know, you can damage,
Mhm.
you know, as far as the nurture, it can go either way as well, but
Right.
they're here for their own we're here for our own reasons.
Yeah.
And our own lessons to learn.
Test what you think you learned.
So is this a documentary or
Yes.
okay?
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like on YouTube?
Oh, I'm sure you, yeah, I watched it a couple, like a year or so ago, so it's fascinating and scary and sad, and really good. But yeah, they documented them from infancy on.
Was it in specific to one country or?
It was
Global.
in around New York,
Or-
to, was it Jewish families?
Interesting.
So it had an ethnicity
Yeah.
associated,
Yeah.
racial, ethnic.
And
Fascinating.
a lot of this stuff is still, you know, under a lock and key, that they still haven't.
Yeah, I would imagine
Yeah.
probably, that's
Oh, yeah.
probably like not really keen on,
But
Getting
the
out.
3 triplets, the ones who found each other, that's where, I mean, and they became big news in the
Yeah.
80s. And they looked, I mean, they're identical.
Wow.
And none of the parents knew there were other, you know, they were like, we would have adopted all 3. And they still specifically chose the parents. They chose a wealthy, affluent family, they chose a working class family, like everything.
All the spectrum.
All of it. It is so sad and fascinating.
So I'll say 1 and 2 for sure,
Okay.
and 3 if you get going and you like it, which probably you will, but don't go past 4.
Okay.
Don't, so stop at 87, don't go past that.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So good.
Thank
Yay.
Wow.
So we got our building blocks, now we're gonna start building.
Yeah. You guys, is everyone following Casey?